How's it going? Welcome to the Nautilus Workshop. I'm Andrew. Today we're going to be talking about shafts. Got a couple of shafts here I'm going to show you guys today. We're going to start off with two different kinds of shafts. This one right here, this one right here. We're going to start from the back and work our way towards the front. You'll notice there's different kinds of shafts for a lot of different kinds of things. We're going to be talking about speargun shafts, non-pneumatic, meaning band gun shafts. There's going to have European style and American style. The American style tang is a square looking notch like you see back here, and then the European tang looks like a half moon notch. There are some that are hybrids that'll kind of look like this, but let's keep things simple. American tang, European spear guns mostly, and then American style spear guns right here. Basically just know which gun you got to make sure you get the right tang for the mechanism that you're going to be using, and then we'll kind of work our way away. Back away, JD, back away. And then we'll talk about different kinds of steel that we use when it comes to spear gun shafts. There's spring stainless steel, will never rust, will never oxidize, and it's usually heat treated 17x4 to depending on which manufacturer, different Rockwell properties. Basically this right here would be a spring steel shaft. The reason this is so desirable not only is because they don't rust or oxidize, but because if you bend them, such as so, they don't stay bent until they reach a certain point. If I bend it enough, I'll bend it, but it has to get to that point. So very desirable in that sense. There's also carbon steel shafts like the Rob Allen style shafts, the South African style shafts. These are very, very, very strong shafts, very rigid. But like spring stainless steel, maybe a little bit stronger properties, but they have a coating on them, that dark coating. Some of them have a gold coating, and that coating is what prevents it from oxidizing. The downside is when you start shooting the shaft into rocks and through enough fish, this coating starts to come off at the tips, and then the shaft will begin to rust and oxidize. So these shafts do rust and oxidize over time. If you take really good care of them, maybe it'll last you a little bit longer than other times. Another thing, another kind of steel that's now here in the States is Sandvik Steel. This is Sandvik Steel. Very nice, very strong. Also will not rust or oxidize. Just kind of like spring steel. In some cases, maybe a little bit better quality as far as rigidity goes. You'll notice this is a Pathos Sandvik Steel shaft. They do not heat treat it on the back half, heat treat it in the middle, and do not heat treat it in the front. Why? Because they want this part to be as solid as possible to go through your fish. And on the back half where the band load goes, you want to have it as rigid as possible so it doesn't flex or bend. So Sandvik Steel is also really, really cool. Now that we talked about different steel, we can talk about different points of engagement where you would load your bands on. It's really not too many options out there. I mean, there is, but we have your standard shark fins, which kind of look like this. There's a lot of different kinds of shark fins out there. These are kind of like mini shark fins. These are angled back shark fins. These are just, you know, little shark fins, very similar to these. Then you have your mini shark fins. This is if you're shooting through a closed muzzle gun or something like that. It'll pass through the bridge. And of course, then there's notch shafts like these. These are Rob Allen's. They have a cut that goes into the shaft. Some downsides to that because it's a weak point in the shaft, but it's also nice because the bands, wishbones line up in the middle of the shaft instead of over it. So it does have some pros and cons to it. Wishbones tend to last a little bit longer if the edges are kind of sharp, if you're using any kind of Dyneema cord or Spectra wishbone like that. So there's also pins. You don't see the pins now too often. A lot of times the pins would pop off the shaft, but there's pins, shark fins, and notched shafts. There's some other ones that are, they call them like little, I think Salvimore had them for a while, the Squallow shaft, but it basically looks like some kind of a shark fin shaft. But that's your standard stuff you're gonna get right here. Now, working our way up, basically, you know, you got your shaft all the way up to the tip. Then you got your flopper. There's a lot of different kinds of tips. You got your Hawaiian style flopper, meaning the barb is on the bottom. Then there's, of course, your Tahitian style floppers. Basically, you got your flopper on the top. So this would be a Tahitian flopper on top, Hawaiian flopper on the bottom. Then there's some that have both floppers on the top and the bottom. They usually just call those Tahitian as well, or just double barbed floppers. Then there's also threaded. This is a threaded tip. You can add a slip tip or different kind of tips that are going to penetrate through your fish. Slip tips are pretty nice for the bigger fish. They don't damage your shaft, and it keeps the other end toggled on the other end of the fish, which is pretty sweet. There's different diameters of thickness for the threads, usually from 6 mil to 8 mil threads. So just make sure you know which slip tip you're going to get if you have a certain specific thread. So the other thing also to consider is the tips. You have your pencil point or rock point tips like this. Then you have your tri-cut tips, which kind of look like that right there, like the raw balance style tri-cut tips. This gives you really nice penetration, but they do get dulled down pretty quickly. So some pros and cons. Pencil point like this. You'll notice it's really kind of like a pencil, really. So once it starts going into rocks and stuff, it dulls out, and you can always resharpen it again. So it's just different styles for different kind of preferences and stuff like that. So the other thing also to consider when buying a shaft is the length that you're going to get and the diameter that you're going to get. There's all kinds of lengths and all kinds of diameters, depending on if you want a short overhang on a shaft, meaning let's say the muzzle's over here, that would be technically considered a short overhang. Your standard overhang is anywhere, between 8 to 12 inches. Short overhang anywhere around, 4 inches maybe, or something like that. So just, consider what kind of, overhang you're going to want to go with. Usually the standard, again, is somewhere in that 8-inch to 12-inch range. And that's something you're going to want to consider. Diameters, there's all kinds of diameters. The thinner the shaft is, the faster it's going to shoot. But there is a point where the shaft, if it's overloaded with too much band pressure, it will whip and bounce on your track. So let's say this is right here, looks like a 7 mil shaft. If we overpower it, we put our band load on the back. As the trigger releases, the shaft will actually flex and bow on the track as it bounces off, and it'll affect your shot. It'll cause it to be less accurate. If you have an enclosed track spear gun, you can avoid those situations, but that's just an option if you do have an enclosed track. If you do not have an enclosed track, you want to try to make sure you balance your shaft weight and length with the proper bend configuration. It's not going to get into that right now because there's so many different ways of doing that. So on your standard pipe guns, you're looking at mostly 6.5 to 7 mil shafts. On beefier guns, you can go from 7 mil to like an 8 mil shaft. You can even go a little bit thicker than that on some big enclosed track tuna guns and that style gun. The diameter of the shaft obviously would be the thickness. 6.25, 6.5, 6.75, 7 mil, 7.5, 8 mil, etc. The length of the shaft is measured in centimeters European wise. So 120, 125, 130s, 135s, etc. Usually it goes by tens. Some different manufacturers, it varies. US, they measure with a different metric system. Instead of using like a 7 mil shaft would be the equivalent of a 9/32, a 5/16 shaft would be the equivalent of about an 8 millimeter shaft. So if you want to learn your conversions, you can Google it, look it up. And as far as length goes, in American style, we go by inches. So here, as you can take a look, this is an American shaft, 9/32 by 48 inches. If I were to convert this into European terms, it would be about a 7.1 7 mil shaft, and lengthwise about somewhere in the 120 range, 120 centimeters. So you can always figure it out and convert it. And that's a quick 101 on shafts. Hope you guys had fun. I had a blast. Catch you guys on the next one. We'll be posting up a couple more things on how to rig your gun properly, breakaways, standard setups with a reel. A lot of stuff to come up, that's for sure. Catch you guys later. A lot of love. See you later.